A guy who just had a boxing match that looks like a sparring match with a 58-year-old Mike Tyson, and then you're going to fight one of the absolute scariest knockout artists in the heavyweight division.
The moment came in the 6th round, and it came with the weight of vindication. Anthony Joshua, the former 2-time heavyweight champion, the Olympic gold medalist, the man built like a sculpture of human perfection, did what the entire boxing world knew was inevitable. He extended that monstrous right arm, and in one clean, precise moment, he shattered every illusion that had surrounded Jake Paul's boxing career. That wasn't just a knockout. That was a correction. That was sport itself, taking back the narrative from spectacle. And when Joe Rogan watched it happen, his reaction wasn't celebration. It was something far more profound: clarity. But this moment didn't happen in a vacuum. The Joshua knockout against Paul wasn't simply about proving a physical superiority that everyone already understood. It was about exposing something far more dangerous, something that had been lurking beneath the surface of the entire Jake Paul experiment since Mike Tyson stepped into the ring with him in November. It was about answering a question that millions of fans, professional boxers, and insiders had been asking in whispers and in group chats. How much of this was real? How much was scripted? And most importantly, how many times has money and entertainment value overridden the authenticity of professional boxing?
That guy did great for someone who's been boxing for like less than a decade. He has had no real professional opponents other than Tommy Fury that were legitimate world-class boxers.
I don't even remember what happened in the Tommy
He
Fury
lost
fight.
a close decision, but it was a good fight. It was a good fight, though.
When Joe Rogan first spoke about Joshua's victory on his podcast, his words were careful. He acknowledged Jake's bravery. A YouTuber stepping into the ring against a legitimate heavyweight champion is objectively a fearless act. But beneath that acknowledgement was something darker, something Rogan couldn't ignore: the physical toll. Paul's jaw broken in 2 places, his teeth extracted, his mouth wired shut for a week. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was evidence. This was the cost of stepping into a world that doesn't care about your followers, your clout, or your ability to monetize content. The fighter had done something most people assumed was impossible. He lasted 6 rounds against Anthony Joshua. But Rogan's analysis cut through the surface. He described Joshua's punch not as a professional knockout, but as something more catastrophic: 10 concussions in 1 punch. He talked about what neurologists call the finite punch card, the idea that every fighter has only a certain number of serious blows their brain can take before permanent damage becomes inevitable. And for Jake Paul, that single shot from Joshua wasn't just a knockout. It was a warning. But Joshua's victory didn't happen in isolation. It happened in the context of something far more troubling. The Mike Tyson fight, which had taken place just over a month earlier, was still consuming the boxing world. And Tyson himself, the man who had faced Joshua's predecessor in one of the most iconic heavyweight battles of the modern era, was saying something that should have alarmed everyone paying attention.
Oh no, I don't remember the fight that much. I kind of blanked out a little. Listen, know what I remember? Coming back from the first round, and then the next day I remember Jacob doing some kind of, I don't know, what was he doing at the ring?
Oh, yeah, a little bow at the end. He bowed.
And that's the last thing I remember. You know, but the day after the fight, right after the day after, I woke up and told my wife, why did I do that? You know, I don't know. I just don't know what the hell goes on.
What did you think of Jake's power, man, when you were in there?
I don't remember it. But my body was really sore. Yeah, my body, my chest, my stomach and stuff was really sore.
Mike Tyson, one of the most fearsome fighters in boxing history, admitted that he blanked out during his fight with Jake Paul. Not tired, not hurt. He said he didn't remember the fight that much. He said he came back from the first round, and the next thing he remembered was Jake bowing. That's nearly 8 rounds he couldn't recall. A 58-year-old legend said his body felt very sore afterward, but he didn't remember why. He claimed he wasn't sweaty, wasn't exhausted, just sore. Now that's an unusual thing for a professional fighter to say, especially one competing in a sanctioned event. Fan speculation erupted immediately. The allegations started flowing across social media. A script, later revealed to be fake and debunked by Twitter itself, had circulated before the fight, claiming to detail how the bout would unfold. Oscar De La Hoya, the Hall of Famer and now promoter, didn't hold back. He said openly on Instagram, "I do believe it was scripted, and I believe that Tyson was definitely held back." The fight's promoters, MVP, released a statement saying that rigging a professional boxing match would be a federal crime, that both fighters competed to the best of their abilities, and that any suggestion otherwise was illogical and absurd. But the damage was done. The doubt had been planted. If a legend like Tyson could blank out for an entire fight, if he could claim memory loss, if the man who faced Joshua could allegedly be held back by contractual restrictions or business arrangements, then what did that say about the other Jake Paul fights? What did that say about the entire ecosystem around his boxing career? And then something remarkable happened. When the Joshua fight came together, when Paul's team apparently pitched the narrative they wanted to unfold, Joshua did something that Paul apparently didn't expect. He refused to play along.
He's also nuts, right? This
Yeah.
the fact that he's willing to fight the two-time heavyweight champion, former Olympic gold medalist,
Yeah.
a guy who's gigantic in his prime,
Gigantic.
built like a Greek god.
Yeah.
And you're gonna stand, and he's a one-punch killer, and you're gonna stand in front of that.
Joe Rogan, discussing this moment, brought up what had become clear from Joshua's performance. Anthony Joshua refused Jake Paul's script. When Joe mentioned this to his guests, the reaction was immediate disbelief, because it meant something profound. It meant that Paul had apparently gone into the Joshua fight with a plan, an expectation, a narrative he wanted to follow. Joshua looked him in the eye and decided that he was a professional boxer preparing to fight another professional boxer, not an entertainer participating in a performance art piece. Joshua came into that fight with the same mindset he'd used to train for Alexander Usyk, for Vladimir Klitschko, for every world-class opponent who had ever stepped into the ring with him. He trained methodically, he planned for victory, he executed a masterclass in patience and ring generalship, and he got the knockout in the 6th round. But here's what made it different from every Jake Paul fight that came before it. Joshua had refused the arrangement. He had walked into that ring as a professional athlete, not a participant in a reality television event masquerading as boxing. And that's when the boxing community started connecting the dots. If Joshua could refuse the script for Paul, what did that mean about the other Paul victories? What did it mean about the Tyson fight? If Paul had legitimately believed he could beat Joshua, if his team had genuinely prepared him for victory against a heavyweight champion, then every comment about taking his foot off the gas, every moment of Paul holding back, every instance of him not fully engaging, all of it suddenly took on new meaning.
It's you could only take so much. And at a certain, like that one that he got from Joshua, say if you have like a punch card, you have like so many punches that you can get in your life, which I believe you do. I believe there's a certain number. That one was like 10 punches.
Yeah.
That was like,
Yeah.
there was a lot of concussions in that one punch.
Sure.
That was real damage. Like,
As the immediate shock of the knockout wore off, Joe Rogan's commentary shifted to something that transcended boxing, because he understood what Joshua's victory had exposed, not just about Jake Paul, but about the entire ecosystem that had enabled him. Rogan, on his podcast, was blunt. He should retire, Rogan said. Not as a slight, not as a joke, but as a genuine plea to a young man who had just experienced what world-class violence actually felt like. Because Rogan understood something that fans watching from their couches might not grasp immediately. That punch from Joshua, that broken jaw, that damage, it wasn't the punishment you recover from in 6 weeks and move on from. It was the physical evidence of what happens when real meets illusion in the ring. Rogan spoke about the cumulative nature of head trauma, about what happens to fighters after they retire, about the depression and addiction that plague so many combat athletes who've taken one too many serious blows. He talked about the finite punch card, the idea that each fighter has only a certain number of serious shots their brain can absorb before permanent, irreversible damage occurs. And he emphasized that the punch from Joshua to Paul wasn't just significant, it was catastrophic. That punch, Rogan said, was like 10 concussions in one shot. He wasn't exaggerating. The force required to break someone's jaw in 2 places, to cause them to lose teeth, to leave them unable to eat solid food for a week. That's not just impact. That's deep tissue damage, neurological trauma, the kind of injury that sends warning signals to every part of your body about what happens when you're outmatched. But Rogan's message went deeper than just the physical danger. It was about the psychological toll, because Paul didn't have to take that punch. He didn't have to suffer that injury. He was already wealthy beyond measure, Already famous beyond what most people could imagine, he had made his money. He had proven his point, or thought he had, and yet he walked into the ring with someone who could legitimately kill him with a single perfectly placed blow. The evidence of that mismatch was undeniable. When the fight was over, when Paul was helped back to his corner, spitting blood and barely conscious from the punishment, the post-fight images told the entire story. Paul's jaw wasn't just bruised, it was shattered, double fractures in 2 places. The damage was so severe that he had to undergo immediate surgery.
In pain?
Yeah, but
Does
it's
it
not
hurt?
it's not from like talking.
Talk to me about what your jaw feels like, because you got
It's like a baseball in there.
two
and then
plates,
It just feels like
4 titanium plates,
4 titanium plates. How many do you have?
just one.
8 screws. 8 screws.
Paul was transported to the hospital, and medical professionals had to insert titanium plates, 2 of them to reassemble his jawline. Teeth were extracted, his mouth was wired shut, he was placed on a liquid diet for a week. When he emerged from that medical ordeal, he posted on social media with a kind of defiant cheerfulness, showing his x-ray, cracking jokes about his situation. The surgery went well. Thanks for all the love and support, he posted. I have to stick to liquids for the next 7 days. But underneath that bravado was a brutal truth that Joe Rogan and the boxing community understood immediately. That was what a real heavyweight punch looks like. That was the consequence of stepping into the ring with someone operating at a completely different level of physical reality. This wasn't a movie where the YouTuber comes back and learns the lesson and gets better. This was reality, and reality has broken teeth. What made Joshua's knockout so significant in the broader context of boxing wasn't that it was surprising. It wasn't that it was even particularly impressive from a technical standpoint. Joshua came in heavier, stronger, and more experienced, and he won against someone who was in over his head. That much was obvious before the bell ever rang. What made it significant was that it served as a reckoning. For years, Jake Paul had built a career on the margins of boxing, operating in a space where traditional sport and entertainment blurred into something unrecognizable. He fought retired fighters past their prime. He fought MMA athletes with no real boxing experience. He fought celebrities and athletes from other sports. And he won, consistently. And his team built narratives around those victories, suggesting that he was becoming a legitimate boxer, that he was approaching world-class level, that maybe, just maybe, he could beat real fighters. But Joshua's KO didn't just prove that Paul couldn't beat real fighters. It raised an uncomfortable question that everyone in boxing was now forced to confront. If Paul was so badly outmatched against Joshua, if the gulf between them was so impossibly wide, then what did that say about his other victories? If Joshua didn't need any script to beat Paul, if Joshua didn't need to hold back or cooperate with a predetermined outcome, then what about the Tyson fight? What about the allegations that it was rigged? What about Oscar De La Hoya's statement that it was scripted?
I'm just hoping after this Floyd fight, maybe we can have a rematch. He did well, but I want to try it again.
Is that something that you would be interested in terms of righting a wrong and knocking him
I
out?
would be interested. Yes, I would. I would be interested in that.
Mike Tyson himself, in the wake of Joshua's knockout, began reconsidering his own performance. The legend who had blanked out during his own fight with Paul was now watching a legitimate heavyweight systematically dismantle the same opponent. And Tyson couldn't help but wonder, had his memory loss been real, or had it been something else? Had his body's soreness been the result of genuine effort, or had it been the physical sensation of going through the motions in a fight he'd been paid to participate in regardless of outcome? The deeper issue that Joshua's victory exposed wasn't really about Jake Paul at all. It was about the entire infrastructure that had been built around him. It was about promoters and television networks and streaming platforms, all profiting handsomely from the circus, from the spectacle, from the carefully cultivated image of a YouTube personality who was supposedly becoming a real boxer. But that image couldn't survive Joshua's right hand. Because when a real heavyweight champion steps into the ring with the intention of demonstrating his legitimacy, the pretense collapses. The money doesn't matter. The hype doesn't matter. The social media followers don't matter. The only thing that matters is what happens when 2 people step into an 8x8 foot square and one of them has trained his entire life. Days and weeks following Joshua's knockout, something shifted in the boxing community. The whispers about scripting and rigged fights, which had been endemic to the Jake Paul Paul experienced since the Mike Tyson bout began to sound different now. If Joshua could expose Paul this thoroughly, if a real professional could so completely dismantle him, then perhaps the issue wasn't with Joshua or the Joshua fight. Perhaps the issue was with everything that came before. Promoters who had worked with Paul began to reassess. Fighters who had agreed to face him began to reconsider what their victories actually meant. And most importantly, fans began to demand authenticity. They began to ask how much of this was real, how much was money and spectacle masquerading as sport. The Joshua knockout served as a reset button for boxing's relationship with influencer boxing. It wasn't that influencers could never step into the ring. Athleticism transcends backgrounds. But it was that the sport would no longer tolerate the pretense that they could compete at levels they fundamentally didn't belong. A comeback from Joshua wasn't just a fighter victory. It was the sport reasserting its standards. It was boxing saying, this is what real looks like. And if you're not prepared for this, if you haven't dedicated your life to this, if you haven't earned your place at this level, then you don't belong here.